5 cents a month for.
Hold. No, Derek, slide.
Oh, Derek, my fault.
Yeah.
Now,
Mike, and
where's
my
mute
turn.
Put it in the chat.
Here we go, mute. And Anderson, you're on mute too for misbehavior of putting the slide content in the chat. Derek, you have the floor. We are ready to go. It is September 4th, 2024. The gang is all here, happy to be here, and we're going to talk about Microsoft 365 backup and archive. So our agenda is to start out like defining our terms, backup versus archive, what's the difference, what's the nuances. We're then going to talk about Microsoft 365 backup specifically, and then maybe the more interesting of the two conversations is Microsoft 365 archive, because there's a lot more nuance to that, especially because then it'll flow into sort of team and site lifecycle requirements. So let's dive right in, get started, and Mark, help us understand the difference between backup and archive.
I realized like a minute and a half ago that they should also talk about sync.
Well, then let's talk about sync.
People tend to interchangeably think that backup and archive they're sort of the same thing, especially end users, but this is less of an end user topic. When we're backing stuff up, it's typically what we think of as sort of warm storage. It's something that we put on a shelf, and we're really doing it more for active content. And we're thinking about, well, how are we going to recover if there's a problem? It's an extra copy of our stuff so that we can get back to a period of time, or we can come back to life after a problem. So it's really about reliability and sort of a fail-safe in case of a serious problem. Whereas archiving something is more like cold storage. You're putting it away in a less expensive location. It's typically inactive content that you don't have to access as frequently, if at all. So it's reducing your storage costs, reducing clutter. Ideally, it gets, you're pulling stuff out of the search index so that you're not finding results that are old, stale stuff, etc. Syncing is something that a lot of people think of when they're working with OneDrive. They're syncing stuff, and they sort of think that syncing is almost like a hybrid of backup and archive. It's it's going somewhere, so it must be safe. And really, all that syncing is doing is keeping two copies in sync. They're managed so that they're always they're always mirrors of each other. But it doesn't give you the backup. It doesn't give you the archive capability. It's really a separate thing. Backing up, putting things into OneDrive is not backing it up. Though it does mean that if you lose your laptop or an elephant stomps on it, then those files still exist somewhere. So there's some definitions.
All right, cool. So as we always do, we're going to sort of take this then and talk about it from a maturity model perspective. So let's do that with backup first. Mark, you want to continue, or do you want to let Todd talk? I can mute him. We've proven that.
I'll talk about the parts where I type things, and then I'm going to put him on the spot.
Oh, okay, that sounds good.
I think for a lot of organizations, from a maturity perspective, when they think about backup, they figure, well, we're not doing anything. Microsoft must be taking care of that for us, and to some degree they are. If you ever want to restore something, you might not be feeling like they're as useful as you would hope. When you get a little more mature, at least you're thinking about, well, we've got older versions of things. We've got things in the recycle bins. So we know how to get back at things that have been deleted accidentally, for example, or we've damaged a file and we want to go back to the last good version. Todd?
Yeah, so one of the things I wanted to kind of call out specifically is when for point number 100, Mark mentioned, isn't Microsoft doing this? That's a common misconception. And Mark hinted to it a little bit at the first one. Backup is disaster recovery, which, like the name sounds, you're recovering from a disaster. And that can be, in the old on-prem days, that could be, files getting deleted, ransomware. I guess that's all on cloud too. What Microsoft is doing is business continuity, which is different than disaster recovery. Business continuity
Good
is
point.
this data center goes dark, but business can keep working because Microsoft is, mirroring something in a different spot. So Microsoft is doing something. They're doing business continuity. They're not doing disaster recovery. Um, like Mark mentioned, versions in the recycle bin, not really backup, but once you start thinking about them that way, there are some situations you can pull yourself out of. I really couldn't think of anything for 300, but kind of the next level up would be using something like the M365 backup, which we're going to talk about in a couple of slides. But that's kind of the next evolution of the, hey, Microsoft isn't doing this the way that I think that it is. And the recycle bin's nice, but it does let me, restore to a different location. Versions are nice, but they always overwrite the current one. Maybe we need something a little better, and that's where M365 backup comes in. And then finally, the highest level of maturity would be a third-party product of some sort. And I put that at a 500 because I think of that as being part of a more holistic backup system. So like, I'm actually backing up. I've got an M365 tenant that I use for email and collaboration with my wife and all that. I'm backing that up to a Synology box. So Synology has a M365, client and all that. So my email, my SharePoint, all that kind of stuff is getting backed up to another spot. I consider that a 500 thing because that Synology box is also backing up my laptop and also backing up a couple of other things. So there's like this big umbrella of backup stuff that's just a little above the M365 backup. So if you've already got a backup system in place, that would be kind of like the level 500 maturity is working your M365 backups into that.
I agree with that entirely. All right, so if we switch gears and now talk about archive, do we want to let Todd just keep talking? I think maybe we do. Go ahead, Todd.
So archive, like Mark said, this is, not active data. This is stale data. And so for archiving, you can do nothing. And I think that's what a lot of people do. The downside of that, like Mark mentioned, is it takes expensive storage and it shows up, it's clutter. It shows up in search, it shows up in navigation, all that kind of stuff. So kind of the first maturity step you can take on that is to roll your own. And I've done some of this with customers before. They've recognized, customers that have project-based things. Once a project is finished, they don't want to delete it, but they also don't want it showing up in search and all their navigation. And so they do things like they remove the property or remove the permissions from the site so that people can't get into it. And then maybe they create an archive hub and put it into there. Maybe they set it to read only so that the contents can't get changed, things like that. But just this very manual process of archiving things. The next step, I would say, is using the M365 archive, which we're going to talk about in a couple of slides. After that, there are some third parties that have archiving. Orchestry is a great example of that. So they've got this great system where they pull the data out of the sites and they put it in another spot, but they integrate it so you can still search it and things like that. It's a really amazing setup. And it's actually kind of what inspired me to start thinking about rolling my own because they did so many great things, pulling it out of search, but leaving the content there, things like that. And then finally, maybe you've got a very specific archiving system that you need where permissions get removed, but certain people have them and there's a life cycle to it all. You may end up rolling your own custom code.
Yeah, and they can start to go together too, right? So like the rolling your code at 200 this is like basic here, and then this roll your own is sort of like maybe with third-party systems and doing, a little bit more stuff there. So, yeah, I think that's definitely a good way to look at that. All right, so now let's go into the details of backup. Todd.
So this is, and the reason that we did this is because the Microsoft 365 backup just went general availability here within the last couple of months. They've been talking about it for a year or so, but now it's really out there. So we kind of wanted to remind people about it. And in the chat, Mark Chrisman's saying that in the Intranet Zone podcast, which is a Microsoft podcast, they've been talking about it too. So they're probably going to dig in a little deeper than we are. But again, M365 backup. So this is active content that you want to be able to recover from disasters from. So the biggest thing right now is that darn ransomware. That's the thing that everybody's getting hit with. And backup will allow you to be protected against that. The M365 backup does SharePoint, OneDrive, and Exchange. But since it does SharePoint, it's also doing Teams. It's doing those Teams files and all that. It has support to be an end-to-end solution from Microsoft for interface and storage and all that, but they also have hooks for third parties, which I thought was a really nice touch in case you've got a big backup solution, you've already got a backup vendor, now you can leverage some of this M365 backup. It's a pay-as-you-go. We've got a slide later that talks about this, but you pay for storage, you don't pay for licenses. So basically you turn it on in Syntex, you set up your pay-as-you-go thing, and all you're doing is paying for the space where the backups are being stored. You have some policies to configure, and basically right now the policies are only which OneDrives to back up, which SharePoint sites to back up, and which mailboxes to back up. There are some grayed out options for how frequently and retention and all that. Can't change those yet, but I got to think since they're in the UI that's the plan. And that would let you change how frequent your backups are. Right now, by default, they're every 10 minutes. And then the retention, I think by default right now is a year. So right now, all you can edit is what gets backed up. So no backup has any value whatsoever. Unless you can restore it. And so what does the restoration process look like? It looks like you discover that you need to recover from something. You go into M365 admin, you go into the backup, you choose the point in time that you want to recover to. And so that is, and I'm going to talk about this in a couple of points here, the RTO, RPO discussion, but this is the RPO of it. You go back to where you want to restore to. One of the great things that I really love about this is that you can restore on top of where the disaster happened. So I guess in the case of something like ransomware where everything's encrypted and there's no value whatsoever to the existing site, you can just restore right over top of it and take it from, 10 minutes ago, 6 hours ago, a day ago, whatever. Or if you need to go through it and look at it and maybe pull some files out, but not some others, you can restore to a different location. And so the way that works is the backup will restore to the original site's name and then R0. And if you do another one, then it does R1. And I think they say not to go up over 100, but if you're restoring the same site more than 100 times, maybe you've got a process problem you should be looking at. Casper asks, how granular is the backup? Can it do a file level? The documentation says file level, but I've not played with it enough to actually have done that. So my guess is I would probably end up, after you go through the menu items, you would see, but the documentation does say file level. One of the things to keep in mind is that the restore time can vary. In the documentation, they say that the restore time can take between 10 minutes and 120 minutes. So keep that in mind when you're, looking to do this. One thing that we always preach is that everybody should have SLAs, service level agreements, about what the service that you provide to your customers, which usually is internal folks. One of the things you should have defined in your SLA is the RTO and the RPO. And so having that set to something like, a couple hours is probably a good idea. So I mentioned here that they're a little fuzzy on the RTO and the RPO. I should have put those definitions up earlier. The RTO is the recovery time objective, and the RPO is the recovery point objective. So the RTO is the recovery time, how much time it's going to take to recover that stuff. So that's the thing I just talked about. That can be anywhere from 10 minutes to 2 hours with the fast recovery, the thing they call express recovery. But once you start getting into older backups, it can take even longer. So that might be something to, once you get out there and start playing with this, wait until you've got some backups that are, a month or two old, see how long it takes to recover those so you can set your RTO in your SLA appropriately. But when you see that in backups, RTO, recovery time objective, what is your amount of time you want to, from the time somebody says, hey, I need this site restored to the time it's back, that's your RTO. The other thing is the RPO, the recovery point objective, and that is essentially how far back do you want to be able to the smallest interval back you want to be able to recover from, also known as the maximum amount of data that you want to lose. So if your recovery point objective is 15 minutes, that means in theory every 15 minutes you're taking a backup, and the most data you will ever lose is 14 minutes worth. Maybe your RPO is an hour, something like that. So that means you're willing to lose up to an hour's worth of stuff. Derek, did you have something?
I had something I wanted to ask you a question.
So
the slide said we can't edit the frequency.
Mm-hmm.
So we can't say so if I set my, HR team site to be backed up,
Mm-hmm.
it's automatically going to every, what did you say, 10 or 15 minutes?
Every 10 minutes. Yeah. So
And it
that's
keeps
what
those for a year?
That's the fuzzy part. Yeah. So for 2 weeks, it keeps every 10 minutes. And then after 2 weeks, it keeps every week for a year.
So it's deleting.
Yeah. So
it's a
going
rolling
back.
delete.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yep.
All right.
That's why I said it's kind of fuzzy. And they've got a nice little graphic that I probably should have stolen and put on here.
Right.
But yeah, no, that and that's something that's important to know, because if you have been telling people we can get you back to 10 minutes, 3 weeks later, you can't get them back to 10 minutes. And there's clearly something going on at the 2-week bit, because that's also where the restore or recovery time objective changes. They've got these express points that are the fast recoveries, and then the longer ones that are, may take a day or something like that.
Because I could just imagine, something happens to a site and somebody calls us up and says, I need to get something. It was, the last time I touched it was 2 weeks ago. Right.
Yeah.
And it's just like, as an admin trying to sift through backups every 10 minutes to find the right one.
Mm-hmm.
So inside that short period of time would just be ridiculous.
It's not a problem, because your end user will know exactly what.
Your end user will have your back.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I put it in the recycle bin like 2 weeks ago, and somebody cleared the recycle bin sometime in the last week and a half.
And I tried copying some other files in to see if they were it. Oh yeah.
Yeah. So that'll make it harder on you. That's good.
Yep. The final thing I wanted to point out is that when you're recovering OneDrive or when you're recovering mailboxes, deleted users are tricky. So depending on when the user was deleted, there are different steps you have to take. If the user's been deleted in the last 2 weeks, you can recover the user and then restore the mailbox or the OneDrive. If not, there are some steps you have to go through. Fortunately, the documentation covers those steps, but I just wanted to bring that up to let people know that if you have deleted the user, it can be done. A little tricky, but I got faith in you. You can do it.
I have faith in us too. All right. SharePoint Premium Microsoft 365 Archive. So I think I'm going to let Todd keep talking, and then we'll take over from there. This is your final slide, Todd, and then I'm.
And then the grown-ups take the mic back. And
yep, exactly. Right. You're done.
So, like Mark said earlier, archiving is mainly for cold things. So projects that have been finished, but you just can't delete them yet. You want to hoard that data. I'm with you. I'm a digital hoarder. I get it. The advantage for this, though, is Microsoft needed some way to be able to honor retention policies and things like that, and also be able to charge you for the space that those things took. So that's really that's really what this product is a way for Microsoft to, monetize that. One thing to keep in mind with all of this is it doesn't cost you extra until you go over your SharePoint quota. So archiving fits inside of your SharePoint quota until you run up against that, and then archiving costs extra. So they did handle that well.
Yeah.
Yeah. So once you turn this on and you set up your pay as you go and all that kind of stuff, then you get this thing lit up where you can archive site collections inside of SharePoint. So instead of just having active and deleted sites, now you've got archived sites. And so you can just click a site or a group of sites, click archive, it will kick off the archive engine and archive them. The data is all still there. And again, it's all still governed by your retention policies, your sensitivity labels, all that kind of thing. Again, that's because they're going to honor that. That's why this became a pay product, because they have to be able to charge you for it. And then you've got an ability, once you need to get some of that stuff back, again, admins can search it. So admins, somebody open up a ticket, admin will go in, find that project, unarchive it. That process, I forget, I didn't put the notes down, but that process can take a couple of days if I remember right. One of the Sempraxians correct me if I remember that incorrectly. And then, yes, Casper mentions you still have to pay for the restore. We've got a slide on that in a couple of slides, but yes, there are some costs involved with this. But overall, pretty easy to move things in and out of archive. One thing I wanted to mention is part of this is Microsoft is going to automatically, starting in January 2025, for those of you in the future who are watching this, they're going to start automatically archiving unlicensed OneDrive for business accounts. So this is, you've got a user, they had OneDrive, they had content in it, the user left or they lost their license or whatever. Now, again, because of the retention policy support and all that, that OneDrive will automatically get moved to an archive site. So if you don't want it to get archived, you can delete it. And again, if you haven't bumped up against your SharePoint tenant quota, then it'll just roll into that. Okay, so Mark got the stuff in there. Yeah, so the archive costs 5 cents a month for.
Hold. No, Derek, slide.
Oh, Derek,
my
Now,
Mike,
where's my
turn?
Here we go, mute. And Anderson, you're on mute too for misbehavior of putting the slide content in the chat. Derek, you have the floor.
Fine, everybody already stole my thunder, but so as Todd was saying, archive and backup.
I was answering Todd's question. Reactivation within 7 days.
Archive and backup are both part of the Syntex pay-as-you-go. But archive, unlike backup, is only after you hit the storage quota. So you can turn it on, you can start archiving things, and you can, like, you know, as long as you're not up against your storage quota, it's good. The one thing you do have to pay for, and I think Casper just mentioned this, is the reactivation. It's just the monthly storage for archived sites that you don't have to pay for until you hit your quota. It's the 60 cents per gig for reactivation for an archived site that you do have to pay for. Now, backup, again, same thing, pay as you go, but the storage for that, you do get hit with the storage fee for that before you hit your quota. And that's 15 gigs per month.
15 cents per gig per month.
15 cents per gig per month. Sorry.
Yeah. No, all good. All good.
And all of that is as of today. When I looked at the documentation.
As of today.
So
yeah, very good.
September 4th, 2024. So it may change tomorrow.
Yes. No, good to point that out. All right, moving on to teams and site lifecycle. Sort of the archiving a team thing. We did cover this on a previous version of Ask and Praxis, but I think it does go here. And so we're going to just rehash these highlights. So when you archive a team, essentially that's so when we say team here, we mean Teams team, but what we really mean is a Microsoft 365 group and all its associated stuff, right? So when you archive a team, which you can do as a user through the Teams UI, you're essentially putting that team in read-only mode. You can still add and remove members, but they have read-only access. Private channels are also affected, and SharePoint is also affected, as long as you check the box. And so I have a screenshot there that's showing that there's a checkbox that will, in addition to archiving the team and freezing the team's activity, make the SharePoint site read only for the team members. So that is a very useful thing. And I think my guidance on this, and I don't know if any Simpraxians disagree, but I think you should just do that. Like, I think that should be the default, that it should be on, because it doesn't make a ton of sense to archive a team. I can't think of a scenario where you'd archive a team and want somebody to be working in the SharePoint site too. That seems a little weird, but maybe there's a use case I just haven't think of. So also, this is super useful because so when you first archive it, it's temporarily just hidden, and then it's only available in the Manage Teams view under Archive. So it moves them out of that view. And especially if you're doing project-based teamwork. So in a lot of our clients, we have like a project center or something, and we spin up a team, Microsoft 365 group team for every project they work on. And if it's a small group and those groups are working on tons and tons of teams, that teams list gets insanely long. It's unmanageable. And so to have some sort of status where you're like, these teams are active and these teams are not active, and so we don't want to delete them yet because they might come back or we might need data from them or whatever it might be, but to archive it and to get it out of your list of teams so that that UI is a little more manageable, very, very handy. in addition to that, we sort of talked about the level 500 maturity of code, custom code. And so I just wanted to sort of talk through that idea of roll your own and what you can do. So from the perspective of scripting and timer jobs, you can use, from a third-party perspective, you can use ShareGate's export PowerShell command. So that export essentially takes all the SharePoint lists and makes them Excel files, or exports them to Excel and takes all the files and puts them in their folder structure from the site that you exported from. So it's a very handy and sort of maybe a line between the custom scripting at the 200 level, maybe just, using ShareGate's export PowerShell command and scripting that and running it once a month for some stuff that you want to archive. That could be more like a 200 level. To the 500 kind of level, which is maybe using a partner like Orchestry, which has great lifecycle management features that Todd was pointing out, and we sort of talked to that sort of like a 400 or 500 level. But they have webhooks on their lifecycle management features. So essentially, you can either force a lifecycle policy to run, or you can trigger extra code when the lifecycle policy does run. And so based on that inactivity, you could trigger something. You could create those archive policies for Teams and SharePoint and Viva Engage, which is the new name for Yammer. I say that new like it's new, but it isn't new. It's new old, and I just can't remember it, so it's new to me. You archive documents, lists, Teams channel posts, a bunch of stuff there. So it's a very robust third-party solution. Again, I mentioned there's HTTP integration, so you can then run your own custom code, which can be so useful, and it has notifications and approvals. So very, very good extra set of features. Okay, so here's a little list of resources. We have the blog post for archive and backup, the link for the SharePoint syntax pay-as-you-go pricing stuff that we shared a little bit earlier, some information on that archiving a team thing, that's useful, a link for the export site PowerShell command for ShareGate, a link directly to Orchestry for the archiving feature. And obviously, if you want to know more about archiving, please reach out to any Sympraxian, and we can help you with the ShareGate or Orchestry information if you need more details on that. And then last but not least, I linked to the earlier Ask Sympraxis episode 97, I think it was. It was the Microsoft 365 Site Lifecycle episode. So that gives you that one, so you can go back through it if that is useful for you. All right. Last but not least, September 18th, we are going to go into changes to the SharePoint editing experience. This has been a common Friday conversation for the Sympraxis team on all the fun things that have been changing. And fun is maybe not the word any of us would use. So we're going to talk about all those editing experience changes that have happened. If you are in the New England area, Collab Days New England, registration is open. Please come and join us. It's on a Friday. You don't even have to take a day off work because it's a free event, and you can tell your employer that you are going to improve your skills in Microsoft 365. And of course, that's not a day off. That's training, and it's free, so they don't even have to pay for it. So you should come and join us on October 18th in Burlington, Mass. At the Microsoft Technology Center. Also, if your business is interested, the call for sponsors is also open. We could use a couple more sponsors to put on these events. Does take quite a bit of money, and so any help that we can garner is very needed and very necessary. So thank you one and all for doing that. TechCon 365 Dallas, Texas. I will be joining that crew there. That's November 11th through the 15th in Dallas. $100 off with that discount code JulieTX. And then Mark, Derek, and Patrick will be at ESPC. That's December 2 through 6th in Stockholm, Sweden. So please join us if you're going to be out and about. And thank you all for joining us today on Ask Sympraxis. We appreciate you coming as always, and we look to see you on September 18th. Thanks, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us this week on Ask Some Praxis. We love getting your questions or session ideas. You can submit by using the link in About. If you find this helpful, hit that like or subscribe button and share this content with your colleagues.